Hello and welcome. My name is Katya Kanini and I work here in the Learning and Community Engagement Department at the National Gallery of Canada, and I'll be your host for the program today. Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge that I am presently on the unceded land of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe people. It is my aim to continue to acknowledge the land upon which I live, work, and play does not belong to me, and work to grow my knowledge so that I may take positive action to reduce harm. While we are gathering virtually today, I would like to share two websites, Whose Land, so that's whose.land/en, and nativeland.ca, that's native-land.ca. Those are two sites that you can go to find out more about the land you are presently on. So today we've gathered here virtually to hear from Krystle Silverfox. And following that, there'll be a conversation between Krystle and Mary Bradshaw, Director of Visual Arts at the Yukon Arts Centre. Krystle is one of the 5 shortlisted artists featured in the 2022 Sobey Art Award exhibition on view at the NGC until March 12th. This event was organized by the National Gallery of Canada and the Sobey Art Foundation. I have a few housekeeping details to share with you before we can dig in and hear from Krystle. So a little bit of an introduction first, then we'll hear from Krystle, and then following that in conversation with Krystle and Mary Bradshaw. We do have simultaneous translation for those who would like to listen to this conversation in French. Nous avons une interprétation simultanée en français. S'il vous plaît, cliquez sur l'icône du globe en bas de votre écran Zoom. So if you'd like to listen in French, just please click on the globe icon at the bottom of your Zoom screen. This talk is being recorded and will be available to watch in the future on our YouTube channel. We are monitoring the Q&A. If you have questions for Krystle or Mary, or later on maybe about the gallery, please do enter them in the Q&A. We'll do our best to get to them during the program. So it's my pleasure to introduce Mary Bradshaw, who will be joining us halfway through the program. Mary Bradshaw is settler Scottish descent, is the Director of Visual Arts at the Yukon Arts Centre, where uplifting a greater diversity of art and communicating these stories in accessible ways is at the heart of our work. Her enthusiasm for and training in art education and museum studies has led to various cultural leadership and curatorial roles in Northern Canada, including the Yukon Prize, the 2022 Arts Summit, Yukon Permanent Art Collection, and a past member of Sobey Art Award curatorial jury. She has an MA in Museum and Gallery Studies from the University of Newcastle, UK, and interned at the Tate, Britain. So Mary will be joining us halfway through the program. Next, we have my colleague, Wasantio Cross, Associate Curator from Indigenous Ways and Decolonization here at the National Gallery of Canada, who is coming on to introduce Krystle Silverfox. Wasantio?
Saigo, Wasundio Yojets. I'm joining you this afternoon from my own home community of Ganawage Ganyakehaga territory. So I'm happy to introduce Krystle Silverfox, who, as you may know, is the 2022 Sobey Art Award finalist representing the West Coast and Yukon. Her interdisciplinary work draws upon her lived experiences as a Northern Tuchone woman and addresses Indigenous feminism, decolonialism, relations to the land, and activism. Working in media such as painting, sculptural installation, and photography, she incorporates materials such as copper wire, pennies, textiles such as Hudson's Bay blankets, and concrete, and her own body to illustrate these relationships, which she will talk about more thoroughly here. She is a graduate of Simon Fraser University's MFA program in interdisciplinary studies, and she currently lives and works on the territory of the Kwanlin Dun First Nation and the Tan Kwachan Council, which is also known as Whitehorse, Yukon. And I must say it was a pleasure and an honor to work with Krystle on her Sobe installation here at the National Gallery, and there's surely much more to come from her burgeoning practice. So please join me in welcoming Krystle.
Dingy. Hello and welcome to my artist talk. My name is Krystle Silverfox, and I am a citizen of Selkirk First Nation. I would like to first acknowledge that I am located on Treaty 7 territory, which is also known as Banff, Alberta. So to begin, a little bit about my artist background. I was born and raised in Vancouver, BC, and I spent much of my time living in East Vancouver, which greatly influences my art practice. Could I have the first slide, please? My educational background includes receiving a Bachelor of Arts in Gender, Race, Sexuality, and Social Justice in 2013, as well as a Bachelor of Fine Arts in Visual Arts in 2015, both at the University of British Columbia. I received my Master of Fine Arts in Interdisciplinary Studies at Simon Fraser University in 2019. A lot of my art practice focuses on concepts of Indigenous sovereignty, land stewardship, urban indigeneity, and Indigenous feminism. My artwork often blends conceptual practice with a material practice, essentially playing with different art forms and using visual arts as a tool to communicate. One of the concepts I have been working with is the idea of belonging. Belonging can refer to owned objects, or it can refer to a connection to community. So much of my work utilizes my own personal belongings to push concepts and my connections to family, place, time, and space. In 2021, I moved from Vancouver, BC to Dawson City, Yukon to teach visual arts at the Yukon University's School of Visual Art. Since then, I have moved south to Whitehorse, Yukon, and I currently live on the traditional territories of the Tan Kwachan Council and the Kwantlen Dun First Nation. This was a huge change for me as I identify as an urban native. But moving north has helped me to better connect with my own family and my First Nation, which is located in Pelly Crossing, Yukon. Moving north helped me to better connect to the arts community, and the Yukon has one of the largest arts communities in Canada. Moving forward, I will be sharing 5 of my recent works, and afterwards, Mary Bradshaw, the Director of Visual Arts at the Yukon Arts Centre, will join me in discussion. Second slide, please. So I'm going to turn off my camera briefly just so we can focus on the art images. I'm starting with an older artwork titled Royalties. This work was created in 2020, and it is a large-scale still life photograph depicting a messy tea party scene. The artwork's title, Royalties, is a play on the words royalties and royalties, such as tea parties. Within the still life photograph, belongings lay strewn. These belongings are all very important to me. The copper teapot was my late grandmother's. The teacups are from my sister's bridal shower, and the eagle feather is from my uncle's wedding. And there is also Indigenous medicine present. An abalone shell, white sage bundle, a sweetgrass braid, and a cedar bough. Next image. Underneath the belongings are several images or several maps and documents, specifically a land use study from my First Nation, and a few maps of my First Nation's territory and reservation. There are also maps of BC highways and roads. In the background, there is snow on the ground and tall cedar trees. So, going back to the title, Royalties. Guessing you're noticing that there's copper pennies everywhere. So I'm thinking about the royalties that my First Nation receives from mining companies in exchange for the extraction of valuable materials, specifically copper. For many Northwest Coast First Nations, copper is a part of our culture and it is an invaluable material. We would make daggers, knives, spears, and copper shields. And for the Northern Tachoni people, it was a way to connect to neighboring nations and tribes through trade. Royalties also portrays a tea party setting, mimicking English high teas and critiquing the colonization of lands that are far removed, such as in the Yukon. All right. Next image, please. Thank you. This next work is called Landmarks, and it's one of my most recent works. So Landmarks is a series of 4 abstract photographs. These abstract shapes are photos of my own body, my folds, my curves. In this work, I'm connecting the concept of landmarks, that is markers of the land, to the body, and how we all have our own bodily landmarks, such as moles, scars, and tattoos. Our bodies are landscapes. And as physical beings, we are almost always connected to the land. If you're familiar with Northwest Coast First Nations art and design elements, you might be able to recognize some of the shapes present. The trigon or trineg, the hat, and the U form. These shapes are found within Northwest Coast First Nations art and are considered building blocks for creating formline design. Formline design is found on totem poles, for example. And the red matting on these images are a reference to traditional Northwest Coast palette, as well as a play on the Canadian flag. All right, next image. Sorry, give me a second. All right, so this next work is my personal favorite. It's called Copper and Concrete. This work is a sculptural work comprised of 4 pieces of found concrete: a scarlet HBC blanket, copper wire, and crow feathers. Again, I'm playing with the idea of belongings. So I'm looking at how material objects can tell their own stories. For example, the concrete is a reference to the land, or at least a reference to my own connection to the land as an urban Indigenous woman. So when I think about connecting to the land, I think about what's under my feet. And growing up in Vancouver, that would mean concrete. So the concrete is wrapped in copper wire to signify the connection between copper and the land, such as through mining. The concrete wrapped in copper is also a symbol of care and protection. In the middle of the concrete pieces, there are crow feathers from East Vancouver. In Vancouver, where I grew up, crows fly from all directions to their giant roost. It is quite a spectacular sight, and this happens twice a day, every day, like clockwork. The red HBC blanket is unraveling onto the floor, evoking spilled blood. The HBC blanket is a reference to my First Nation, Selkirk First Nation, which is named after Fort Selkirk in the Yukon, and Fort Selkirk was a Hudson's Bay trading post. Next image, please. Fort Selkirk was a meeting place between the Northern Tachoni and the coastal Tlingit, but eventually the Hudson's Bay Company moved in and created Fort Selkirk to disrupt the trade between the Tachoni and Tlingit peoples. Subsequently, Fort Selkirk was destroyed twice by the Tlingits as an act of immediate decolonization. The unraveled Hudson's Bay blanket also refers back to my nation's tradition of ripping Hudson's Bay blankets during potlatch to gift the opposite clan. The layout of the works also refers to the story about how ravens spread the land in the 4 directions. 4 is a sacred number to the Northern Tachoni people. It is reflected within our Dooley law, that is, our traditional protocols. The 4 pieces of concrete are placed to represent the 4 directions. And they are aligned with the compass directions. The dark piece of concrete points north towards my home in the Yukon. The crow feathers, they pay homage to Raven. Also, the placement of the work on a short plinth close to the ground is meant to reflect the land. Viewers are forced to look down on the work as if looking at the ground. So in a way, this work connects my own culture to my own experiences and perspectives. Next slide, please. Okay. This one's quite a mouthful. So lastly, perhaps my most well-known work is All That Glitters Is Not Gold. I created this work in 2019 as part of my MFA master's thesis at SFU. So if you want more information outside of this talk, there is a long essay that describes everything in depth. This work is an HBC blanket ripped in half with fringe that extends to the floor, connecting the artwork to the land. On the floor are copper pennies. The Hudson's Bay blanket is suspended with copper in a cedar frame that is similar to a hide tanning frame. Again, the practice of ripping and gifting HBC blankets during potlatch is significant here. To create the work, I received the help of the opposite clan, which is Crow, so I could adhere to our Dooley law, our protocols. And also the practice of ripping blankets within my nation, it ended over 100 years ago with Canada's potlatch ban. Next image, please. The title, All That Glitters Is Not Gold, refers to a few things. First, every metal in this artwork is copper, and it's very shiny. So copper nails, copper pennies, copper wire. The title also refers to gold, and the Yukon is perhaps most well known for gold deposits and the gold rush. But here, it's about copper, not gold. And perhaps the most significant part of the title is the ellipses at the end of the title, which is a stand-in for the word corp, as in Gold Corp. Gold Corp, now called Newmont Mining, started a mine within my First Nations territory, Northern Tachoni territories, and did not get consent from my First Nation or other First Nations, which is protocol per the Umbrella Agreement. The Umbrella Agreement is the agreement between Canada and self-governing First Nations in the Yukon. So oddly enough, at the time I created All That Glitters Is Not Gold, I was actually a student at Simon Fraser University, and the building that we were working in was named Goldcorp Centre for the Arts. Next slide, please. Thanks. Also, the title of the work is a common saying, which means appearances can be deceiving. The work is meant to portray the messy and complex relationships between First Nations or nations in general, like the Nation of Canada or Selkirk First Nation, which is self-governing, and corporations. The history of Canada is, as a nation, it is founded on corporate interests. Canada would not exist as it is if it were not for the Hudson's Bay Company, which exported furs from Turtle Island to Europe. So when it comes to compensation from these mining corporations, First Nations, they get pennies on the dollar. That is to say, we get very little in exchange for the permanent alteration of our lands. All That Glitters Is Not Gold is my way to express my feelings on these mining companies and the relationships between Indigenous peoples and the Canadian state. This work is also about reclaiming old practices and honoring my ancestors. The fringe touching the floor connects the artwork to the land, and the pennies on the floor represent the land and mining. For me, the Hudson's Bay blanket is a symbol for Selkirk First Nation. And the copper symbolizes First Nation trade and land. So essentially everything in this work is about connecting culture and land and really just telling a very northern story. So with that, I would like to end this talk and turn my camera back on, I guess. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Krystle. That's actually this is a really great moment. I'd like to bring Mary, invite you to turn your camera and your microphone on. When we were developing this event, we were talking about this idea of context, and specifically in relation to all that glitters, the context in which it's been shown up in the Yukon, and then down in Vancouver, and then here in Ottawa, and then also this idea of the importance of context in the creation of work. So I'm just going to step away and let you guys continue that conversation because it was so lovely to hear you speak together. Thank you.
Thanks.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Katja, and thank you, Krystle, for having me here, inviting me in. I'm so pleased to be joining everyone from the traditional territories of the Tonquitchin Council and Kwanlintong First Nations here in Whitehorse, Yukon. And as Katja said, I'm really excited to dig in with you, Krystle, on this work in particular, because it has been shown in 3 really different places. And yeah, and just hear how, what you feel like, how the location of, this specific artwork really affected, the understanding or the reading of it.
Yeah, I created this work initially as my MFA final thesis piece. And when I was approaching this concept or the artwork itself, the art gallery I was working with is the Audain Gallery at the Goldcorp Centre for the Arts. And the Audain Gallery is on East Hastings, where I grew up. And they have this giant window that faces the street. And personally, I feel like a lot of gallery spaces are a little bit intimidating for people to come in and visit. So I wanted the artwork to be facing in the window. And that itself, yes, this one. So on the left side of this, that you can't see, there's a giant window. I wanted the artwork to be facing a window so the public had access to it. But also I realized that having this artwork behind glass actually mimicked how a lot of Indigenous artworks are portrayed in museums and galleries. So I'm really thinking about like how artworks are displayed and how like the environment around the artworks can like really, I guess, speak to the artwork itself.
Yeah, that's true. With that glass like storefront, it's not something where you can. It is, in a sense, very democratic. Everyone can see it. You can see it at all times of day, but you can't enter it. You can't touch it in the same way that you may, like in other spaces.
Yeah, and also a side note, this building that everything is in, Goldcorp Centre for the Arts, it's more well known as Woodward's Vancouver. So Woodward's is around when I was growing up. But Woodward's, before it was Woodward's, it was the Hudson's Bay Company building. So this building has this long history of, I guess, like corporate interests.
I had no idea. It also had the Hudson's Bay tie as well. I mean, and Goldcorp, I mean, as a Yukoner, is just, it's a big name up here. And so like, I remember when I first saw your work, just like this particular piece I only saw in photos, but seeing it was in the Goldcorp, I'm like, whoa, there's, a heaviness and a really controversial tie, immediately to mining and to, their practices up here, frankly, so.
Yeah, and for people who aren't from the Yukon, mining is one of our major industries. So it was really interesting because after I had this work displayed here, I actually had it moved into your gallery, Mary. And I feel like having it shown in the Yukon, it adds a whole another layer of meaning and understanding. And for people who actually like live and work and rely on mining corporations up north, this piece could speak a little bit more about the nuances or the different and I guess varied relationships that people do have between like First Nations land, the company they work for, their job, you know, their identities. It's really interesting.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I was so excited to be able to have this work be able to be shown in the Yukon. It just felt so important. It brings together like so many threads of that Yukon story, you know, and I think we benefited as well. You know, folks know who the Selkirk First Nation is here and know that tie to Fort Selkirk and HBC. Yeah, and just even just the straight ahead importance of copper. It really, like, obviously the Yukon is known for, you know, gold mining, you know, through the gold rush, etc. That's a history that's projected everywhere. But really, when you talk about, you know, an Indigenous context, the Yukon First Nation context, copper was the incredibly valuable metal. The, you know, that real wealth of the land was the copper, was the piece that was traded. It's too bad. You've got some so beautiful details, like even the nails that Krystle has used are copper. The thread that's tied, that's, you know, mimicking like stretching a moose hide, stretching that blanket, is also copper. It is so incredible to be able to, like, all of these details incredibly thought out, Krystle. I don't know where you're able to store some of those, like the nails.
Oh, thanks. I love those nails. They're gorgeous. I wish I had a image of a close-up. But yeah, just it's really interesting because it's a very shiny artwork that you don't really see how shiny it is until you're up in front of it in person. And it's also very large. It's like I think it's my largest piece. And I'm just like always, every time it's like I made the artwork, but every time I'm with the artwork, it's almost like it speaks to me in a different way. Like it's become its own thing. And also I'm really like, I got to show this artwork in Ottawa. So that again adds another layer of meaning behind like the display and where it is located and what it's referring to with all of the little details. So for example, while this artwork is inspired by the Hudson's Bay Company and Fort Selkirk's history as being a Hudson's Bay trading post, the artwork is actually like in the Yukon, we actually don't have any Hudson's Bay Company stores or anything. It's gone. So I guess Fort Selkirk getting burnt down twice kind of sent a message. But it's interesting because everywhere else in Canada, every major city, there's a Hudson's Bay Company. So I'm just like, when I put the artwork up at the National Gallery, there's a Hudson's Bay Company like 2 blocks away. So it's like kind of interesting to be like, oh, hey, here's another blanket.
No, for sure. And I mean, and of course, Ottawa itself is just such, you know, a center of power. And I think even like so tangibly for Yukoners, you know, I think maybe the rest of the country really kind of sees, you know, Toronto or Vancouver as kind of like the big cities. But I think for Yukoners, it's so much of like, no, we see like that center of power in Ottawa. I mean, it's only, I think, like 50-ish years ago that the Yukon even got its own like proper, you know, government. You know, all, you know, we think of like provinces and territories each have a premier, but that only happened, you know, in the 70s in the Yukon. But before that, it was just run straight out of Ottawa in terms of, and of course, you know, the umbrella final agreement and the nation to nation relationship is our First Nations with the federal government. So.
Oh, actually, that's a good point. I also want to note that 50 years ago, we had the signing of the umbrella agreement. Well, not the umbrella agreement specifically, but we actually had one First Nation person from each of the 13 First Nations in the Yukon go travel personally to Ottawa they wanted to have a better future for their First Nations in the territory. And so they put forward a document called Together Today for Our Children Tomorrow. And that document is very significant to the Yukon and how we actually, I guess, navigate.
Yeah, I mean, it paved the way for modern treaties here for self-government and as Krystle mentioned, it was February 14th, 50 years ago. So we've been celebrating this month, that kind of landmark anniversary.
Yeah, lots of potlatches last week for sure, or a couple of weeks ago. Yeah, so bringing this artwork, which is, I would say, very critical of the Canadian state to the Canadian capital, it's almost like I feel like I'm following through with that tradition of, like the First Nations all going personally to Ottawa to bring up issues with the Prime Minister. So like I'm not speaking with the Prime Minister, but I am bringing my artwork to the National Gallery, which is a big deal. And yeah, to be honest, I was very hesitant about displaying this work there because it's a lot of work to install. And I just felt like, it's been shown twice in other places, but then I was working with Watson Tiu and she's like, well, it would have another layer of meaning if you do bring it to Ottawa. I think people in Ottawa really need to see this. So I'm really glad I was talked into it because I feel like having it in Ottawa, it makes it more powerful.
Yeah, I mean, like you really are in the shadow of the Parliament buildings there practically. That's incredible. And I think it's such a nuanced and piece that has so much strength that I'm thrilled that it was part of the Sophie show and really can kind of help tell your story and your practice.
No, thanks. Yeah, I'm still pinching myself over this whole Sobe thing. But also, this actually brings me to one of my questions for you, Mary, is like, well, I just moved to the Yukon a few years ago, and I've noticed that there's a huge arts community, so many artists. I actually work for the Yukon government, and I did learn a statistic that we have one of the largest communities of artists per capita. So that compared to Vancouver and Montreal, while we might not have the numbers, we do have like a good percentage of artists that live up north. So my question for you, Mary, is how do you see the north, which is it's pretty far out there. It can get dark, it can get really cold, or it can be like bright all the time and really hot. How does the environment influence people making art in the Yukon? Do you see any trends or patterns maybe?
Well, so much to talk about on here. And actually, Katya, I think we're good. We probably don't need slides up, hey? What do you think, Krystle?
Well, if you have some slides, maybe.
No. Perfect. Yeah, I mean, I think just as you say, like even just first trends. Yeah, I mean, I think that connection to land is huge. I mean, something you started out even talking about. I think you can't help but be affected by the land here. It's imposing, it's huge. With the temperatures alone, like it can kill you. It's something you have to respect in that way, right? That you can't just walk out your door without your proper gear on, and be it summer or winter, frankly. And And so I think that definitely ends up playing into Yukon artwork. I think really, as I say, like I think you can't help but in some ways that no matter kind of what kind of medium you're working in. And yeah, we do have a really big arts community, despite the fact that we have like 40,000 people in the entire territory. And about 30,000 of it is within Whitehorse. Yeah, it's still like a huge percentage, nevertheless, of artists, and it's really supportive. I don't know if you feel that. I'd love you to comment on that too. I feel like there's an openness though, and like a willingness for collaborations. And artists tend to be, pretty welcoming and ready to share info, even if it's, as simple things of like, oh, this is where I'm getting my materials, or where are you shipping from? Or I actually was just pre-talk looking on Instagram and saw this really beautiful collaboration that's happening. Calvin Morberg, he is inland Tlingit artist. He's a carver. He works in copper. He's currently making these series of like puppets that are carved out of wood. They're beautiful. And then he went and asked Kaylin Baker, who's known, she's Northern Shoshone, known for her beadwork. And so she's making these tiny little vests and mucklucks for these wooden puppets. And it's the most like beautiful thing, but it also feels like so incredibly Yukon. Like, of course, you happen to know them, you can pick up the phone and be like, hey, would you like jump in on this project with me?
Yeah, for sure. Wow, that sounds like the dream team right there. I can't wait to see these puppets. Yeah, when I lived in Dawson City, which is, I guess, the other, so like urban city, if you could call it that, in the Yukon, there's a population there of about 2,000 people. In the summer, in the winter, it's a lot smaller. But I used to live in Dawson City, and when I got there, I was teaching at the School of Visual Arts, and I was just totally taken away with the community, the arts community. There's a lot of artists up there, but there's no art store. And so how do you navigate being an artist in a small community like that? So like we were talking about before, how you have to rely on people to survive in the Yukon. You have to rely on your community connections. It's like a lot of that is also transferred into like the arts community and other communities as well, I'm sure. So it's really a unique experience being up north, because it really forces you to change from like having a very independent art practice, where if you need supplies, you can just go down the street to the art supply store, to actually having to build connections with people and find different kinds of resources. Yeah. Just quickly take a look at my questions again.
No, for sure. I'd love to even hear what you kind of feel like some of, we've talked about even just straight ahead, like getting materials, but some of the challenges, maybe opportunities of your move north and what it kind of meant, within your practice. And
Oh, well, that again, like I went from being like a very independent artist working by myself in the studio to, well, actually it's very different up north, because where I live in Whitehorse now, there are no art studios. So you'd think that that would be a big hindrance to making art. However, the Yukon has a lot of artist residencies. And so you kind of have to, I guess, really just hunker down and apply for everything, but also just I had to push my own practice to understand that it wasn't just going to be the same as it was in Vancouver. So I had to learn how to reuse materials, for example. I remember I was a bit taken back because a lot of the artists in Dawson City, for example, when they need supplies, they go to the dump. And in Vancouver, you don't go to the dump. You just don't. So going up north and going to the dump, and it's like you go to the dump and everything's organized perfectly and clean. It's like, whoa, this is the dump. And you do find supplies there, but I really had to like challenge myself and really I guess like let go of some of these preconceived notions of what I can and cannot do as an artist. I think that's a lot of artists as well, like trying new things and being experimenting. Yeah, and in a way, it made me a better artist. not not being comfortable. Being uncomfortable can like really make a person grow, that's for sure. But I was wondering, what do you see for people coming up north? Like, what are some resources that people could find? Like, I know that there are a lot of art residencies. Do you see any?
Yeah, I think that's such an interesting piece that you pulled out. Studio space you would expect. I think a lot of folks just assume like, oh well, if you only have 40,000 people, of course everyone must have all of this space, but that isn't really the case. Most artists, I can think of like literally a handful that I know that really have a true studio space. Everyone is just, working out of their homes, working out of like what space they can kind of make do with. And you're right, I had not kind of linked the studio and residency. We are pretty residency rich. Kayak, which is the Klondike Institute of Art and Culture out of Dawson, have been running actually kind of an incredible residency for at least 30 years. I want to put it out there. Bringing international artists into the Yukon, but also having space for Yukon artists as well. On our end at the Yukon Arts Centre, we don't actually again have a whole lot of like physical space to run residencies. So we've been partnering with other groups within the territory, particularly Parks Canada and actually Yukon Parks as well. And we've been running like these on the land residencies. Really, again, to give artists kind of time and space. Maybe there's less creation is happening out there while you're like camping on the land or walking through it, but really making sure, just allowing that real connection to happen with these like incredible places that we have in the territory.
Oh my goodness, yes. I was just telling somebody, because every time I'm like, oh, I live in the Yukon, they think it's like a flat land with only snow. But it's gorgeous in the Yukon. There's giant like mountains everywhere, beautiful water. The air is the cleanest air in the world. When you're there, the landscape is just, I don't even know if I have words to describe how powerful the landscape is. And like you said, you have to like really, you have to respect the climate up there. You make sure you're properly dressed for, the winter or the summer. And I think it's really interesting that there are a lot of arts residencies up north that actually do utilize bringing people out onto the land. I know that there's an artist residency that actually last summer took artists to Fort Selkirk to make artwork, which I was like, dang, I didn't know about that until way after it was done. But it's such a it's amazing that like a historic site like Fort Selkirk could have an artist residency and to bring people to like learn about the history as well. I think it's really important. And like being uncomfortable really does make a person grow.
No, for sure. And again, for folks outside of the Yukon, like Fort Selkirk is, even within the Yukon, considered quite remote. Like there isn't a road to it. You canoe in, really it's access right off the water. It's again one of those like just there's no words, just maybe like awe when you're there. You can really understand why it really was such an important trading place. Like it is this real meeting point.
Yeah, I love that. It's like, I don't know, that it is like a trading point, the Tachoni and the Tlingit people coming together. but I also just love that story of the Hudson's Bay moving in because they saw these two very powerful nations coming together and trading. Actually, I do have a funny anecdote about that. Well, it's not really funny, but so Fort Selkirk, when it was the trading place between the Tachoni and the Tlingit people, we didn't have a Hudson's Bay up north, but the Tlingit people, they had Hudson's Bay companies down south. So we used to trade chilkat blankets for copper and other resources. And I guess at some point, the Tlingit people realized that these Hudson's Bay company blankets were actually a lot less labor intensive to acquire than making a chilkat blanket. So they switched and started trading Hudson's Bay blankets to my nation. We had no idea what a Hudson's Bay company was or like Hudson's Bay company blanket, but these blankets, they were revered with my nation, and we ripped the blankets before we even knew what the Hudson's Bay company was and before they even moved up north. So it's like this really interesting and complex relationship. Yeah. Sorry for the rant, guys.
That's incredible. I mean, it is, to think of like, yeah, how these goods were moving and trading before even, I think the word contact, but yeah, before the colonizers themselves even moved. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
No, for sure. I'm trying to think, you mentioned as well, like, yeah, what other kind of challenges artists might face. I think, working out of the Yukon is definitely something I hear about it all a lot. Although I gotta say, you're one of our shining examples of, a Yukon artist being, recognized and really getting their work outside of the territory, which is, I think, a real it gives hope. It gives a lot of excitement, I think, within the artist community,
Oh, that's so sweet and nice. Oh, I'm very humbled by this. To be honest, I feel like when I moved to the Yukon, it was just like people understood what I was doing, and it made a lot more sense. In Vancouver, like just explaining where the Yukon is or where my First Nation is within the Yukon was a little bit challenging. So it's nice to like not have to explain all of my art practice ideas, because for a lot of people, these are like their actual lived experiences as well up in the Yukon. Yeah, I feel like moving up north has really been such a great career booster for myself. And also I feel like way more grounded because I have connections to my First Nation and my family up there too.
Yeah, no doubt. I was thinking about that as well, like, of course, Vancouver is, an exciting, cool place to grow up, to be practicing. But I'm sure it's just even like the access, yeah, straight ahead to family, and even just to ceremony that happens, just a little bit closer here, hey?
Yeah, for sure. It's really nice. It's just great to be with my family and my nation. And also, one thing I'm just going to throw out there for everybody, going to the Yukon, you will be so surprised. Everyone's so friendly and nice. It is like, I went up to the Yukon and I stayed because of the people.
You know what? That's a pretty common story. I swear that's a good chunk. It's particularly in Dawson. They've come up for an artist residency and now they just live there.
Yeah, for sure.
It's our scheme.
Yes, come to the artist residencies.
That's right.
Oh my goodness, this is a good point for me to just pop back in, because I have to say, in developing this program and getting to spend time with the both of you, I have to say, I do want to move to the Yukon. Because it's been really, really lovely getting to know you and talking about all the opportunities there are up there. One of the things I remember in the conversation, Krystle, you had said that you actually really noticed the change in your career from when you were down south to when you moved up north, and actually that there was a blossoming of your career, and you noticed that there was actually a lot of opportunity. And generally, a lot of artists feel that they have to move into an urban area to get their career rolling. And for you, it was really kind of the opposite. Am I misremembering, or is that kind of inaccurate?
That is very accurate. Actually, I do teach at the School of Visual Arts at Yukon University. And it's a 1-year program. So if you want to get your Bachelor of Fine Arts, you have to move out of the territory. And that is one of the things I'm personally struggling with, because I would like for artists not to leave the territory, to feel like that they could make their own careers better. So perhaps that's something I could be working with the government in the future. I don't know.
That sounds good. And also, like, I really love this idea of how you had to rely on everybody. And then because of that need, you ended up having such a tight-knit community. And I think because resources are, depending on your situation, resources can be easier to access in an urban area. People don't connect as much, and there's a beauty in that connection. And I think, there's not everybody likes to chitter chat, and so this kind of forced need to connect and create connection and build that community is actually kind of a really unique, beautiful thing. And relying on people and having them rely on you is a different kind of relationship. And perhaps that's what makes that arts community so strong.
Yeah, I think so. And also, I'm a shy person. I don't really like to do public speaking. That's why I make art. But I found that because the Yukon people are way more friendly, it's actually really helped me with my personal shyness. So people are very understanding and welcoming, regardless of where you're from up there.
That's neat.
It's quite beautiful.
And I noticed, Mary, also we had discussions about people finding innovative ways of displaying art, like having art outside of the institutions, because there aren't galleries up there really, like a lot of commercial galleries up there in the north.
No, for sure. We have this incredible arts community. I mean, there are galleries. We have a couple of almost kind of arts centers. Our space is a public gallery, but yeah, I think there is a desire, and need just to get out and make art. Right now is our this rendezvous weekend, which is kind of our winter carnival kind of equivalent. And one of the big beautiful things that are happening is all of these giant snow sculptures. So in a sense, it's a gallery outside as well. And there's a few artists here who actually, Nicole Balberger has set up what she calls the Trail Gallery, which is literally just outside the back of her house. It's on this lovely little walking trail in one of the neighborhoods. And she collaborates often with even the local school, and they'll create work to hang in the trees as you walk along the Trail Gallery.
Well, it sounds fantastic. I have to say, you've sold me on my next place to live. So I do want to thank both of you for participating in this event. I want to thank the NGC team behind the scenes. I want to thank the Sobey Art Foundation for their support of this program. I want to thank the participants, all of you who've joined us today, some from the Yukon who know how great it is up there, and some from all over the country who are now planning their next trip up there. I'd like to thank Wasantio for joining us to introduce Krystle and for the fantastic work she did on the Sobey Art exhibition. And again, Krystle, thank you so much for your work and talking about it in such a beautiful and thoughtful way. And really, just the beauty and the detail of your work is astounding. Mary, thank you for the richness of your conversation. The Sobey Art exhibition is on view here at the National Gallery until March 12th. For those of you who are unable to visit us here in Ottawa, you can go to our National Gallery YouTube channel where we do have a video profile that Krystle made. And she shot it last year up there in the Yukon. So you get to learn a little bit more about Krystle and see some beautiful footage of the Yukon. But that's it for us today. Thank you so much for joining us. Be sure to check out gallery.ca for more artist talks and upcoming events. But that's it for now. Thanks so much. Bye.
Thank you.
Thanks, bye.